All right, welcome everybody to today's Mooc. It is a lovely day in Vienna, Austria, and we have a great topic prepared for you, which of course is the ideal Tricentis Tosca test portfolio. Before we start, let me briefly introduce your hosts for today's session, being myself, Thomas Hanke, Senior Training Consultant representing the Tricentis Academy, and joining me today is Alexander Ertl, Senior Automation Architect here at Tricentis. Not only do we have a great topic for you today, but we also have a little treat for all attendees who will stay with us for the whole Mooc. In the end, you will get a free training course. You will not only get one free training course, but in fact, you will get 2 free training courses. So if you stay through the whole Mooc, you will receive an email, I think about an hour after the Mooc has ended, with a voucher for your free training courses. All right. Before we start, I would like to talk about some ground rules. I know some of you who join our Moocs on a regular basis will have heard this many times, but since there are some people joining us for the first time, please allow me to talk about our housekeeping rules. All participants will be muted during this session. As there are hundreds of you currently attending, obviously everyone talking would be pretty confusing and hard to follow. There is a control panel at the bottom of your screen with apps that you can toggle on or off. The key ones being Q&A, Twitter, and the media player. Please note, if you pause the media player, we will disappear. You won't be able to hear anything, so please do not do that. And even though you are all muted, we do of course encourage that you ask questions during the session. Please use the before mentioned Q&A box for that. In the end, there will be a Q&A session, and therefore we will hold the most interesting questions for this Q&A session so that everyone can profit from the answers. We will, however, try to answer as many questions as possible during the session, but please be aware that only questions related to the topic will be covered. Please also keep in mind that given the number of attendees, we might not be able to answer all of your questions during the session. And lastly, let me state that this session is being recorded and will be shared on our website later this week. All right, I think that's enough from me, so I will hand over to Alexander, who will introduce us to this very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. I choose this topic because I'm working now for almost a year with a large enterprise customer, and I found out that creating those initial workspaces is not maybe as easy as it sounds, but with a few tricks and tweaks in Tosca, you can go in and basically set up your whole enterprise structure very easily and prepare everything for a new project within your company. So for this, I prepared 3 tracks here. We have like the concept, then we have the demonstration of how it's done in Tosca, and in the end of this session, we can follow up on a few questions you might have answered. Okay, so let me show you what we're going to discuss in this Mooc session. First, I want to talk with you about the infrastructure. So what is needed to be prepared from an enterprise perspective, but also from smaller customers we have. What is needed from a server side, what is needed from a client side. Then I would like to talk about the user management or user role concepts we can introduce within Tosca so that it makes it easier for you to enroll the right people to the right project as well as assign them the right roles. Third, I would like to talk with you about the folder structure within a project as well as a reviewing process. As you know, when we do a lot of initial projects, we have a lot of consultants coming to the customer side and doing those reviews and give you the best practices. So how is this initially set up, and what are the thoughts from the PSO department on this particular folder structure? And in the end, I would like to talk about the synchronization policies you can introduce so that the workspaces are as small and as slim as possible, so that you don't have to synchronize every object in Tosca and lose a lot of time just synchronizing between the database and your client setup. Okay, so coming to the infrastructure. First of all, what do you need? Well, you need a server, a so-called Tosca server, which follows like those ground setup, like an i5 with 4 gigabyte RAM, at least 200 megabyte hard drive space, and a network connection of 100 megabyte per second. If you have more space and more power available, that's even better. But these are the least requirements you have to have in place to even get started, to set up your license server, to set about all the different license component and server components we have within Tosca. And which databases are supported? Well, we support Microsoft SQL, Oracle, and DB2. So most of the time we get asked the question, yeah, but what is in from a long-term perspective? How much space should I give those databases? What should the RAM look like? To be honest with you, if you can set up your database with at least 5 gigabyte and with a dynamically growing space, that would be the ideal case. So that you maybe start with 1 gigabyte and then it grows dynamically, and with 5 gigabyte you should be totally fine. So there's no need of having like 30, 50 gigabyte of storage for your database because Tosca is not getting this big when it comes to all the test objects. Okay, then let me quickly talk about with you about the user management and the roles we introduce in large enterprises. So most of the time we have 3 roles defined, which is the automation architect, which is someone who reviews the portfolio, runs risk assessment and test case design workshops, shows and trains everyone on Tosca, sends out report, and is responsible for the distributed execution setup. Then we have a second role, which is called the test case design specialist. So basically someone who defines the requirements and the test case design after the TCD1 and TCD2 training, which is also available on our Trainings Academy homepage. And you see here a third edible item, which is the classes. For one who is not familiar with that concept, please go to our support portal. That's a really important topic. It basically helps you to have less maintenance in the test case design area. And then we have a third, or let's say a split role here, which is the automation specialist as well as the automation engineer. These are basically the people who build the test cases as well as create the custom controls. But they don't have to have read or edit rights on every certain folder. They just need, for example, you see it on the module level, they should just have read access. Because once the automation architect has approved a certain module, there is no need to go in there and change anything. unless from a maintenance perspective. So this is basically what we come in. There might be a fourth role, which is like a viewing role, where people from the management can go in and maybe take a look at the Tosca. Most of the time, from a reporting perspective, they take a look into the requirement structure to see how many test cases have been executed and how many are still missing and what is the business risk. Or people from the business who might be interested in, okay, what are the recovering certain test cases are covering. So let me quickly jump into Tosca and show you how you can set up a certain user role definition. For that, we prepared a small initial setup, which has here, for example, the standard modules from the Tricentis support homepage, a few reports, and an initial folder structure. I'm going to explain that in my next session here, but let us concentrate now on the user management. So, as you know, on the project root, there is a tab called User Management. What you can do here is basically create certain user groups and define them as you like. So what we have seen now is that we have 3 different user roles. We can have automation architect, then we have automation specialist, which is also the engineer in that case, and we have the test case design specialist. Oh, sorry, that was a typo. Okay, so we have those 3 roles, and let's say I have one user who is an architect, and it's called AA1 for Automation Architect 1. And I can have several of those, Automation Architect 2 and 3. And then I can have certain automation specialists. Let me quickly create some of those. And some test case design specialists. Okay, so basically this would be coming from an LDOP group, which is coming from the Microsoft Active Directory and can be synchronized every day, every hour through a TC shell call and gets updated automatically, so you have the latest user in here. So there's no need that you do that with the Tosca users. I'm just doing that here from a demo perspective. So we have now our users, but say like, okay, I have one automation architect here and 3 specialists who are working on one project, and on the next project I have automation architect 2 working just with 2 of them. So the automation architect 1 shouldn't see the project from 2, and automation specialist 1 should also not see what his colleagues are working on. How I can control that? Well, for that we need an initial folder structure to be set up and a certain user group structure. So let's say we define who can see what on a test case level, like the blue area in Tosca. So I can say test case, and then I can say test case design. So basically creating for every area in Tosca a so-called user group. Execution list, and then we have the very powerful section of the modules. Okay, so that would be the initial structure for our user concepts. And now I can assign certain people to, or the whole user group, to a area. Okay, so we will now assign those roles to certain areas. So what I can do is say, okay, the test case design specialist just should have access to the requirements, and just by drag and drop them, this creates a so-called user group link. To enable that, you need to activate a certain settings in your Tosca commander. This goes into the Tosca commander exe-config file and just needs to be activated on the PC who is going to do this kind of setup. There is a setting called enable hierarchy user groups, and if you set this to true, it basically allows you to drag and drop and create those user group links. So doing that, I'm also going to assign the test case design specialist group to the test case design area, and that's basically it. Based on our user role definition, we said, okay, people from who has taken the test case design specialist class are allowed to access the test case design area as well as the requirements area. So now I'm going to do the same thing for the test case design specialist. For the automation specialist. This people will have access to the modules as well as to the execution list and to the test cases. And then we come to our most powerful user group, which is the automation architect. Those people have basically access to every section. So I'm just going to create those links. You can also collapse that to make it easier to define that. Okay, so we have defined those certain areas for the user roles and where people can access the certain areas in Tosca. Okay, so this is basically now our initial setup. Now we have to say, okay, who can access those certain areas? For that, we say like owning group is the execution list user group. So all the people who have assigned access to the execution list user group here, like all the architects and all the specialists, can access this. The same thing goes for all the other areas. Owning group for the modules would be the user group modules, and for all those other sections. So now coming back to our scenario where the automation architect 1 is working together with all of the specialists, and automation architect 2 is just working with automation specialist 2 and 3. How can I now set this up from a project perspective? Well, we first of all will copy our initial folder structure for new projects. So I will have a folder structure which is called then project 1. And I can copy this as well and say project 2. Okay, and for that I also need a certain user group to assign people to project 1 and project 2. So I create one user group which is called project 1, and the second one which I call project 2. And now I'm going to assign all the people who are working on project 1 to this certain user group. And the same thing I will go on and do for project 2. And now, since I have copied that, I can say, okay, people who are working on project 1 can see and work on this particular user group folder structure, and for project 2 I'm doing the same. So now only people who have been assigned to project 1, to user group project 1, can see the project and can work on the certain areas in Tosca based on their user role. And the same thing goes for the project 2 folder structure. Okay, so let me just log out here and show you what the automation specialist 1 sees, for example. That I would just close the workspace and sign in again as AS1. So once I sign in, you see I see the default folders, which we now could also set that only admins could see that, as well as our sample folder structure. But you see that the automation specialist 1 just sees the project 1 folder and doesn't see the project 2 folder. And in addition to that, he can't work in this area because we said automation specialists are not allowed to work in the test case design and in the requirement section. If I now go back and log in as automation specialist, automation architect 1, I also see this folder, but I can work in these certain areas, create a new requirement set, and create my requirements. But I don't see the automation project 2. And if I log in as automation specialist 2, who has access to both of the projects, but also is not allowed to create requirements in those certain areas. So once you have done this pre-setup, it's very easy in large enterprises to create a new repository or a new project. Let us log in again as admin, and we can also now say that we don't want to see those folders. Basically, we just set this to admin, and then those folders will not show up. One area which I want to mention is the modules area. So we have one module section which is right under the project root where everyone should have access. But only automation architects or admins should be allowed to check this out, since those modules will be used by everyone. So it makes sense to say, okay, the owning group are the admins, so they can import a new subset of the Tricentis standard modules, but those modules can be seen by everyone. If I now save that and log in, for example, as Automation Specialist 3, you will see, okay, I can see all the standard modules and use them. Like let us create a test case here, and I can drag and drop the modules from the area over here. Okay, so that's basically how you can set up the user management for your large enterprises, but also for like smaller test portfolios. Okay. Okay, let me talk about a little bit about the folder structure and why certain folders are in place and what's the idea behind that. So normally when we run an initial project with our customers, people needs to get trained and people needs to get familiar with the tool. So what we are doing to have a certain reviewing process in place, we introduce like 4 or sometimes also 5 different folders to work and create the test cases in. So there will be one folder which is called planned test cases, which is basically your backlog, like from an agile perspective, where you have test cases which needs to get automated, but you don't know when you will start working on them. Then you have the in-work folder, and after below that, you have certain folders with the people's name where they can work in and create the test cases. Once the automation specialist thinks that the test cases has been finished, he moves that to the review folder. And then if the architect makes the decision if the test cases have been completed, he will move that to the completed folder. Or if not, he moves that back to the rejected folder or to the in-work folder. It depends on the certain structure. I would recommend to have a certain rejected area because it makes it easier to find which test cases have been rejected and need specific attention. Okay, and here is just the explanation I just have done. You can take a screenshot if you like, but this will basically help you to have a certain review process in place. So how does this look like from a folder structure perspective? Let me go back to our 2 projects here. And you see I have a backlog folder where I basically create all my test cases and say like, okay, I have to work on them. And then I have an in-work folder where I can have certain subfolders, which would be then AS1, AS2, and AS3. And here the people can just move test cases and work on them. So they can work then on backlog item 2 and 3 and maybe 4. And once they are done, they can move it in the review section. And the test case, the automation specialist then approves them and moves them to the completed folder. And then we can basically run those test cases whenever we like. The same structure we would need for the modules, because whenever modules have been approved, they shouldn't change that often and shouldn't be touched that often. But since people are learning this tool, we thought, okay, we should have the same folder structure as under the test cases, but we don't need like a backlog folder here. That would not make sense. For the test case design, it would make sense, because you say like, I think there's a requirements which needs a certain structure, and I can define that, but I say like, okay, I don't have time, let's put it into the backlog. And from a requirements perspective, you can also like work on a certain requirements structure. That's basically when we do those risk assessment workshops. And once they are completed, well, then you move the requirement set into the completed area. What you also could do, if you like, you could restrict the access for certain people, like automation specialists, to the completed area. This would make it a little bit more complicated, but what you would then need is like another owning user group, which is then called test case design, test case restricted, or something like that, that only like automation architect have access to that. That's also an additional way you can make sure the test cases don't get deleted, don't get changed. But it adds more complexity to your user management. Okay, that's basically how the folder structure and the reviewing process works. Now I would like to talk with you about, a little bit about the synchronization policy. As some of you know, Tosca repositories can grow very easily and take some time to synchronize with the database. But don't synchronize every object, there are certain synchronization policies in place. So per default, we have this setting or this property in place, which is called customizable default on, which means per standard, all the objects below that would be synchronized and basically downloaded from the common repository. There is another option which is called customizable default off. Then all the objects in that particular folder will not be synchronized or basically excluded from the synchronization, but you can manually synchronize them if you like. There's also a third option, which is called cannot be excluded, which makes sense, especially for the standard modules, that they can't be excluded from the synchronization. And then there's a fourth option, which is called cannot be excluded from the whole tree. This can be, for example, also used for the modules, but also for other objects you want to share with everyone. So to have this in place, it makes more sense for sure to have that set off. And this goes hand in hand with the user management. So only if people can see this folder, they will see the objects below that. So like those folders. If they are not assigned to this project, it will not synchronize, which makes the time for the synchronization between the client and the database faster and more robust, I would say. And on our module, standard modules, as I said, it would make sense that we say cannot be excluded for the whole tree. This means all the objects below, even if they are set to the synchronization policy customizable default on, it applies the highest synchronization policy. And then we can save that, and you can basically start with creating more projects. You can start with creating more and more repositories if you like. It might make sense to split repositories through lines of business, like you have a procurement department and you have a FI department, or even another department which just concentrates on the daily business, and then you have a department which is more like concentrating on a corporate organization like HR or something like that. Okay, since this was the last topic, I'm happy to talk about a few questions.
All right. Let's start with the Q&A session here. As I said in the beginning, we did pick some questions that we want Alex to answer for us so that you all profit from the answers. And the first question would be, how can I execute my test cases unattended?
Well, there are a few options how you can run those test cases. One would be that, which is the simplest one, that you use TC Shell and the Windows Task Scheduler to execute your test cases at a certain point, at a day, at a week, at a month, if you like. But it would also run like on the physical machine. So you would have to set up this TC Shell script on the machine where the test cases should be executed. But it's kind of unattended. The second thing would be the distributed execution environment that if you have that already in place and if you're familiar with that. But let me spend some words on that. It's basically a server which distributes test cases. So if you say like, I want to execute my 500 test case portfolio, the server takes care and distributes the test cases, or better to say the execution lists, to the machines which are available, which means idle. What you have to make sure though is that the agent is properly configured, which means you have to have the right application installed, maybe have been logged in, or the test case is logging in with the right user, which is not blocked or something like that. So maybe you should have a user with a non-expiring password, if that's possible. But then you basically can run your test cases unattended, and in combination with the TC shell, you can also trigger it at a certain point at a time, so like daily or so at 2 p.m. The third option you would have is an integration with to your build tool or build server to Tosca CI. So whenever a Jenkins server, for example, creates a new build of your application, it triggers the Tosca test cases and brings the results back to the build server, and the build server makes then the decision if I can go to acceptance, production with this new application or not.
Okay, perfect. So we also picked this question because since we did talk about DEX and CI now, stick around until we end our Q&A session when we will talk about our next upcoming MOOC, because if you're interested in those two topics, then you are in luck, but I will get back to that in a second. I would like to ask a few more questions. There was another one coming in. How can I import or get my test data or test sheets from Excel, for example, to Tosca?
Well, there is a certain structure needed, but you can basically copy and paste that from Excel to the test case design area. There are a few templates which comes with the default installation, and yeah, you just have to have that in the right format, and then you can just say copy in Excel and paste it onto your test sheet.
All right. If you're interested in this in a bit more detail and want to see how it works exactly, we did a MOOC on that topic. So if you go to our website and in our MOOC section, we have all of our previous recordings for you to rewatch on demand. And there was a MOOC about data sources like Excel and so on. So definitely check that out if you're interested in some more detail here.
And maybe to add, it's not only for the test case design area, you could also use copy and paste, for example, in the requirements section.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have a rather general question. Nevertheless, I would like for everyone to have an answer to the question. We have been talking about test automation and requirement engineering, so test case design and requirements section and so on. But of course, Tosca offers more than that. Maybe Alex can tell us a few of the things that Tosca offers additionally.
Yeah, sure. Well, the tool has great capabilities with the test automation as well as with the requirements engineering, but you also have this areas like exploratory testing or exploratory testing, which is also or comes within your Jira infrastructure. You also have OSV, the service virtualization, and then you can do BI testing. You can do as well manual testing, or you can also do go in and use the Tosca recorder for say like web or SAP testing. There's also something which is more technical with the API testing. So you have more options than just test automation. The tool comes with like more than just this capability.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks for clearing that up. Also, I would like to remind you again about the possibility to rewatch some of our MOOCs, because some of these topics we already did cover. So if you're interested in one of these additional offerings, please go to our MOOC website and browse through our previous recordings. All right. There is another question. Since we did talk about LDAP when it comes to user management and the user roles, the question was, do I have to set any specific settings to activate LDAP usage?
Well, this was needed in previous versions, but since version 10.2, it's automatically activated, so you don't have to roll out a certain configuration file anymore. It's automatically activated, and like everyone in your corporation can use it per default.
Okay, that's nice. Okay, I think we have time for one or two more questions. So let's continue with this one. Does my database server or my database and the Tosca server, do they have to run on the same server?
Short answer, no, it doesn't have to be on the same server. But it might make sense to have it on the same server because it's easier to maintain for you, and you don't need like 5 different servers to cover all your Tosca work.
Okay. All right, and then we have one more question which I want to pick up, and this question is again with the user management, and in this case regarding user permissions. And the question was, are there any restrictions on which elements in Tosca I can set user permissions?
No, basically you can set user permissions or set those user groups on every object within Tosca.
All right. Okay, perfect. So I am afraid that we will have to end the Q&A session here. As I said, we are very sorry if we don't get to answer all of your questions, but you will see in a second that there are more than one ways for you to get some answers again. And since I already teasered it before, I want to talk about our next upcoming Mooc. And this will be exactly on those topics: distributed execution, DEX, and also been talking about a little bit of CI. And this will be on the 8th of November. And of course, as always, we do have 2 sessions to cover the different time zones. All right, so you can already register for that session if you're interested in distributed execution or CI. Okay, and lastly, the only thing left for me to do is to guide you to any further assistance that you might need. So as I said, very sorry that we didn't, if we didn't manage to answer all of your questions. But you can see if you have any more questions, you can, of course, contact our support under support@tricentis.com. If you have any questions regarding our training offerings, our online courses, or these Mooc sessions, please do not hesitate to contact academy@tricentis.com. And for your self-learning and for you to find help yourself, you can always refer to the knowledge base and the online manual. Online manual we did show you before with the setting. And of course, I did mention it more than once now. Please go and see our previous Mooc recordings and watch them on demand if there is something interesting for you. You can also find us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, of course. I would also like to engage you to stop by our YouTube channel. We recently added a lot of new videos to our Heartbeat channel, which are very, very short videos that cover a specific topic in Tosca. And I'm sure that you will find something interesting and learn something new there as well. All right. I think that's it from me. The only thing left is to thank you, Alex, for taking your time and explaining us how you would set up your workspace. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Then thanks, Alex, and have a good day. Bye bye.